In the autumn of 1862, a tall figure in a dark coat stands before the Prussian parliament, his eyes cold and calculating behind a facade of aristocratic composure. Otto von Bismarck, newly appointed Minister-President of Prussia, has just uttered words that will echo through history. The great questions of the day, he tells the assembled parliamentarians, will not be decided by speeches and majority votes, but by iron and blood. The liberal delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. They do not yet understand that they are witnessing the birth of a philosophy that will reshape the map of Europe within a single decade. At this moment in history, Germany does not exist. Where a unified nation should stand, there sprawls instead a patchwork of 39 separate states, each jealously guarding its sovereignty, each with its own laws, its own army, its own dreams of greatness or mere survival. The German Confederation, established after Napoleon's defeat, is less a nation than a geographic expression, a loose alliance dominated by two rival powers who circle each other like wary predators. Austria, ancient and imperial, claims the mantle of German leadership through centuries of Habsburg tradition. Prussia, younger and hungrier, builds its strength on military discipline and an emerging industrial might. Between them lie kingdoms, grand duchies, free cities, all watching to see which giant will prevail. Bismarck belongs to Prussia's Junker class, the landed aristocracy of the eastern provinces who have shaped the kingdom's character for generations. His family estate at Schönhausen represents everything he was raised to defend: tradition, hierarchy, the natural order of kings and nobles ruling over a deferential peasantry. Yet this man, who seems the very embodiment of conservative values, possesses a mind of startling flexibility. He understands that the world is changing, that the liberal nationalism sweeping across Europe cannot be simply suppressed. Instead, it must be channeled, manipulated, turned from a revolutionary force into a tool for strengthening the Prussian state. This is his genius and his gamble. He will build a German nation, but it will be built on Prussian terms, cemented with Prussian victories, crowned with a Prussian king. The first test comes swiftly. To the north, Denmark rules over two duchies, Schleswig and Holstein, territories inhabited largely by German speakers who chafe under Danish control. When Denmark's King Frederick VII dies in November 1863 without a male heir, the succession crisis provides Bismarck with the opening he has been waiting for. The new Danish king, Christian IX, makes the fatal mistake of attempting to incorporate Schleswig directly into the Danish kingdom, violating old treaties that had kept the duchies in their peculiar half-attached status. German nationalist sentiment explodes in outrage. The Diet of the German Confederation authorizes military intervention, but Bismarck has no intention of acting as the Confederation's agent. Such an action would strengthen the collective German body at Prussia's expense. Instead, he proposes that Prussia and Austria act together as joint principals, claiming to defend treaty rights rather than German national interests. It is a masterstroke of diplomatic maneuvering. By partnering with Austria now, Bismarck ensures that his ultimate rival cannot oppose him. By framing the intervention as a defense of international agreements rather than German nationalism, he provides cover against French and British interference. And by keeping the German Confederation on the sidelines, he elevates Prussia's status as a European power acting on its own authority. The war itself is brief and brutal. Prussian forces storm the Duppeler Schanzen fortifications in April 1864, demonstrating to all of Europe that Prussia possesses a modern professional army capable of swift, decisive action. The needle gun, a breech-loading rifle that can fire 5 shots in the time an enemy with a muzzle loader can fire 1, gives Prussian infantry a devastating advantage. That autumn, Denmark has surrendered, ceding Schleswig, Holstein, and the small territory of Lauenburg to joint Prussian and Austrian control. Now comes the slow poison. Bismarck has no intention of sharing these duchies permanently with Austria. The joint administration becomes a deliberate source of friction, a festering wound in Austro-Prussian relations that Bismarck tends carefully. He negotiates the Convention of Gastein in August 1865, which appears to resolve the dispute by dividing administrative control. Prussia takes Schleswig, Austria takes Holstein, and Bismarck is elevated to the rank of Count for his diplomatic achievement. But nothing is resolved. The arrangement is inherently unstable, designed to fail. Bismarck needs Austria to be the aggressor, to make the first threatening move that will justify Prussian military action. And so he waits, probing, prodding, ensuring that every administrative question becomes a source of tension. While he waits, he prepares. In April 1866, Prussia signs a secret treaty with the newly unified Kingdom of Italy. If war comes with Austria, Italy will attack from the south, dividing Austrian forces and preventing them from concentrating their full strength against Prussia. Russia, still grateful for Prussian support during the Polish uprising of 1863, maintains a benevolent neutrality. France, under Napoleon III, is persuaded to stay out of the conflict through vague promises of territorial compensation to be determined later. Britain, focused on its global empire, sees no vital interest in German affairs. One by one, Bismarck isolates his target, ensuring that when the moment comes, Austria will stand alone. The moment arrives in June 1866. Austria, exasperated by Prussian provocations in Holstein, brings the dispute before the Diet of the German Confederation, calling for federal action against Prussia. Bismarck declares the Confederation dissolved and orders Prussian troops to occupy Holstein. The smaller German states, most of them traditional allies of Austria, mobilize for war. Hanover, Saxony, Bavaria, Baden-Württemberg all rally to the Habsburg cause. On paper, Austria commands superior numbers, and its allies bring millions more men to the balance. But Bismarck has calculated correctly. The Austrians are slow to mobilize, their army scattered across an empire that stretches from Bohemia to the Adriatic. The smaller German states act independently without coordination, their forces divided and easily defeated in detail. The Prussian army moves with mechanical precision. 3 separate armies totaling 285,000 men converge on Bohemia from different directions, each moving on its own supply line, communicating by telegraph with the Supreme Command in Berlin. This is warfare transformed by the industrial age. Prussian troops travel to their jumping-off points by railway, covering in days distances that would have taken weeks by foot. Chief of Staff Helmuth von Moltke has spent years studying maps, planning supply routes, working out railway timetables with the obsessive attention to detail that will become his trademark. He is not a charismatic commander in the romantic mold. He is something more dangerous, a calculating mind that treats war as a problem in logistics and geometry. The Austrian commander, Ludwig von Benedek, knows he is in trouble before the first shots are fired. He has accepted this command reluctantly, unfamiliar with the terrain and uncertain of his troops' readiness. His army of 240,000 men takes up defensive positions near the Bohemian town of Königgrätz, attempting to block the Prussian advance toward Vienna. The Bistris stream provides a natural defensive line, and Austrian engineers work frantically to clear fields of fire and construct abatis from felled trees. The Austrian artillery, superior in range and accuracy to its Prussian counterpart, is carefully sighted to dominate the approaches. If Benedek can fight a defensive battle, by letting his guns do the work while his infantry conserves its strength, he has a chance. But Moltke does not intend to let him fight the battle he wants. On the morning of July 3, 1866, The Prussian First Army attacks across the Bistris, fixing the Austrian center in place. The Austrian artillery tears into the advancing Prussian columns as they emerge from the smoke of their own guns. Prussian infantry companies armed with their needle guns take cover in the broken terrain and return fire. But the Austrian guns are winning this exchange. Then, from the north, the Prussian Second Army under Crown Prince Frederick William crashes into the Austrian right flank. Benedek has known they were coming, has requested cavalry to scout their approach, but his requests were ignored or misunderstood. And now 105,000 fresh Prussian troops pour down from the hills of Chlum, their needle guns cracking in steady volleys against Austrian infantry still equipped with muzzle-loading rifles. The needle gun proves its worth in this moment. Prussian soldiers can load and fire while lying prone, presenting minimal targets to enemy marksmen. The needle-shaped firing pin that gives the weapon its name pierces the paper cartridge from behind, igniting a primer at the base of the bullet with mechanical reliability. Austrian soldiers standing to reload their muzzle loaders expose themselves repeatedly to this withering fire. The psychological effect is devastating. Entire Austrian battalions dissolve under the impact of rapid, accurate fire coming from enemies they can barely see. The Austrian cavalry attempts to cover the infantry's retreat, charging again and again into the Prussian positions, suffering horrific casualties but buying time for the shattered army to pull back toward the Elbe River. By evening, the Battle of Königgrätz is over. Austria has lost more than 45,000 men killed, wounded, or captured. Prussia has lost 9,000. The disparity in casualties tells the story of technological and tactical superiority translated into battlefield dominance. More importantly, Austria's will to continue the war has been broken. Within 3 weeks, preliminary peace terms will be agreed at Nikolsburg. Within 2 months, the Treaty of Prague will formally end the conflict. And in those negotiations, Bismarck's diplomatic genius matches his strategic vision. King Wilhelm and the Prussian generals want to march on Vienna, to humble Austria as completely as possible, perhaps even to seize Austrian territory. Bismarck refuses. He understands that he may need Austrian neutrality in future conflicts. He understands that humiliating Austria too thoroughly will create a permanent enemy when he needs a potential partner. And most crucially, he understands that European powers will not tolerate the complete destruction of the Austrian Empire. France, in particular, watches nervously as Prussia's power expands. Napoleon III has been making increasingly aggressive demands for compensation for Prussian territory in the Rhineland as the price of French neutrality. Bismarck must end this war quickly before France decides to intervene. The Treaty of Prague, signed on August 23, 1866, reflects these calculations. Austria is excluded from German affairs, forced to accept the dissolution of the old German Confederation and the creation of a new North German Confederation under Prussian leadership. But Austria loses no territory to Prussia. Its army is left intact. The peace terms are deliberately lenient, allowing Austria to preserve its dignity even in defeat. The smaller German states that sided with Austria are treated differently. Hanover, Nassau, Hesse-Kassel, and the Free City of Frankfurt are simply annexed to Prussia, their ruling dynasties deposed. Prussia's territory expands by nearly a quarter. Its population increases by more than 4 million, creating a contiguous power bloc that stretches from the Rhine to the Russian border. The southern German states, Bavaria, Baden, Württemberg, and Hesse, south of the main river, remain independent. They are too large to be annexed without provoking French intervention, and Bismarck judges that they are not yet ready to join a German nation-state. But he secures something almost as valuable: secret military alliances that commit these states to place their armies under Prussian command in the event of war with France. Publicly, the South German states maintain their independence. Privately, they have already been integrated into the Prussian military system. The German question has not been fully answered, but it has been decisively tilted in Prussia's favor. In France, the news from Königgrätz produces shock and anger. For years, French strategists have assumed that war between Austria and Prussia would be long, exhausting, leaving both German powers weakened and dependent on French mediation. Instead, Prussia has emerged as the dominant power in Central Europe virtually overnight. The French press demands revenge for Sadowa, the French name for Königgrätz, even though France was not involved in the battle. This call for revanche pour Sadova becomes a drumbeat that will not fade. French nationalist sentiment has been wounded not by defeat, but by irrelevance. Napoleon III, whose regime relies on prestige and military glory, cannot afford to appear weak in the face of Prussian expansion. Bismarck understands this. He understands that war with France is now inevitable. The question is not if, but when, and who will appear to be the aggressor. For 4 years, he waits. The North German Confederation takes shape under his guidance, with a constitution that concentrates real power in Prussia, while creating the appearance of a federal structure. The southern states watch nervously, pulled between their desire to maintain independence and the gravitational force of Prussian power. Bismarck does not rush them. He knows that only a war with France will overcome southern German particularism, will create the emotional unity necessary for complete unification. And he knows that Napoleon is looking for an excuse to fight, to restore French prestige through a victorious war against the upstart Prussians. The excuse arrives in June 1870 in the form of a diplomatic crisis over the Spanish succession. The Spanish throne stands vacant, and the Spanish government has offered it to Prince Leopold of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen, a distant relative of the Prussian king. Leopold is Catholic, not particularly important in Prussian politics, and has his own doubts about accepting the Spanish crown. But the mere suggestion that a Hohenzollern might rule in Madrid sends French diplomacy into apoplexy. France sees itself being encircled by Prussian influence, caught between a Prussian-dominated Germany to the east and a Prussian prince to the south. The French government demands that Leopold withdraw his candidacy. More than that, French Foreign Minister Agénor de Gramont demands that King Wilhelm provide a guarantee that no Hohenzollern will ever again seek the Spanish throne. Wilhelm, taking the waters at the spa town of Bad Ems, is approached on his morning walk by the French ambassador, Count Vincent Benedetti. The king politely declines to provide such a guarantee. Leopold has already withdrawn his candidacy, Wilhelm points out reasonably. What more does France want? Benedetti persists, following the king around the park, pressing his government's demands with what Wilhelm later describes as annoying persistence. The king remains courteous but firm. He will not provide the sweeping guarantee France demands. Later that afternoon, Wilhelm instructs his aide Heinrich Abeken to send a telegram to Bismarck in Berlin, reporting the conversation and giving Bismarck permission to publicize the exchange, if he sees fit. Bismarck receives the telegram while dining with War Minister Albrecht von Roon and Chief of Staff Moltke. He has been in a dark mood, convinced that the crisis will end without war, that France's honor will be satisfied by Leopold's withdrawal and the opportunity to unify Germany will slip away. He reads the telegram aloud. It is polite, factual, almost boring in its diplomatic correctness. Then Bismarck takes out his pen. He does not add anything to the telegram. He does not fabricate any statements. What he does is more subtle and more devastating. He condenses Wilhelm's account, removing all the courtesies, all the softening language, all the diplomatic padding. What remains is stark and insulting. The French ambassador made demands. The king refused. The king declined to see the ambassador again. Bismarck's edited version makes it sound as though both men insulted each other, as though Benedetti was dismissed with contempt, and Wilhelm treated the French Empire with calculated disdain. Moltke and Roon watch as Bismarck transforms the telegram from a diplomatic report into a declaration of war. When he finishes reading the edited version aloud, the mood at the table has completely changed. Moltke, usually reserved to the point of taciturnity, slaps his hand on his chest and declares that if he can lead the German armies in such a war, the devil can fetch his old carcass afterward. Roon, tears in his eyes, declares that their old god still lives and will not let Prussia perish in disgrace. Bismarck sends the edited telegram to the newspapers. By the next morning, it is on every front page in Europe, the Ems dispatch that will trigger the war Bismarck has been maneuvering toward for years. In Paris, the public reaction is explosive. The edited telegram is read as a deliberate insult to France, proof that Prussia seeks to humiliate the French Empire. The Paris mob gathers in front of the Tuileries Palace, chanting for war. In the Chamber of Deputies, opponents of war, led by Adolphe Thiers, argue desperately that the French army is not ready, that Prussia and its German allies are stronger than France realizes. They are shouted down. On July 14th, Bastille Day, France begins mobilization. On July 19th, France declares war. Napoleon III, seeking to stabilize his shaky regime through a victorious war, has walked into Bismarck's trap. And critically, because France declared war, Prussia appears to be the victim of French aggression. The southern German states, bound by their secret treaties, mobilized to defend Germany against French attack. Bavarian, Württemberg, and Baden troops march north to join the Prussian armies. The German unification that Bismarck sought is happening, forged in the heat of shared struggle against a common enemy. The war itself is a catastrophe for France. The French army, supposedly the finest in Europe, proves to be poorly organized, inadequately supplied, and commanded by generals whose tactical thinking has not progressed beyond the Napoleonic era. The Prussian and German armies, numbering twice the French strength, cross the Rhine and drive deep into French territory. French forces are bottled up in the fortress city of Metz, where Marshal François Achille Bazaine sits with 170,000 men, unwilling to break out and unable to effect the wider campaign. Napoleon III attempts to relieve Metz with the army of Chalons, but the Prussians intercept this force at Sedan on September 1st, 1870. The Battle of Sedan is less a battle than a methodical destruction. The French army is trapped against the Belgian border with the Meuse River at its back. Prussian artillery, which has learned much since 1866, pounds the French positions from the surrounding hills. French cavalry charges against Prussian infantry positions achieve nothing but horrific casualties. By afternoon, Napoleon III, watching his army disintegrate, orders a white flag raised over the city. He surrenders himself and 83,000 soldiers to the Prussian king. The Second French Empire effectively ends in that moment. Within days, Republicans in Paris will declare the Third Republic and vow to continue the war. The siege of Paris begins in September and drags on through the winter. The city suffers terribly, its population reduced to eating rats and cats, and eventually the animals in the zoo. The Prussian armies, camped in the luxury of Versailles, wait for the city to surrender. Inside Paris, revolutionary sentiment grows. The regular French government, unable to defend the capital, retreats to Bordeaux. When the city finally surrenders in late January 1871, the humiliation is complete. France will be forced to cede Alsace and part of Lorraine to the new German state, will pay a massive indemnity of 5 billion francs, will endure German occupation until the indemnity is paid. The annexation of Alsace-Lorraine, those border provinces that had been disputed between France and Germany for centuries, it will poison Franco-German relations for decades, will help set the stage for the even more destructive wars of the 20th century. But before all that, there is a ceremony to perform. On January 18, 1871, the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles is transformed into a theater of German triumph. Approximately 600 German princes, military officers, and officials gather in the ornate gallery where Louis XIV once celebrated his victories over German lands. The choice of location is deliberate, calculated to maximum effect. The ceiling paintings glorify French conquests of German territory. The entire palace is a monument to French power and French pride. To proclaim a German empire here, in the very heart of French greatness, now is an act of symbolic revenge that Clemenceau will remember 48 years later, when he forces Germany to sign the Treaty of Versailles in this same hall. An altar stands in the center of the hall for a religious service. German princes gather around it, their battle-scarred regimental standards creating a forest of silk and steel. Near the entrance to the adjoining war room, a platform has been erected. Wilhelm I stands on this platform, surrounded by the rulers of the German states who have come to recognize him as their emperor. Crown Prince Frederick William stands to his left, Grand Duke Frederick of Baden to his right. The assembled princes and officers wear their dress uniforms, medals gleaming in the light from the 17 arched windows that look out toward the gardens. Outside, German troops stand in formation, awaiting to add their cheers to the ceremony. Otto von Bismarck, wearing the white uniform of a Prussian cuirassier, ascends the platform. He holds a document that has been carefully drafted to reflect the unanimous appeal of the German princes to Wilhelm to accept the imperial dignity. The wording has been agonized over for weeks. Wilhelm wanted to be called Emperor of Germany, a title that implies sovereignty over German territory. Bismarck insisted on German Emperor, a vaguer formulation that emphasizes the federal character of the new state, that suggests leadership among equals rather than dominion over subjects. The southern states, jealous of their remaining prerogatives, prefer Bismarck's formulation. Wilhelm has acquiesced, but not without resentment. Even at this moment of triumph, the political tensions that will characterize the empire are visible beneath the surface. Bismarck reads the proclamation in his clear, carrying voice. The document proclaims that the German princes and free cities have unanimously called upon Wilhelm to assume the imperial office that has been vacant for more than 60 years since the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire. It declares that with the restoration of the German Empire, the German imperial office is renewed. It announces that Wilhelm, by the grace of God, King of Prussia, accepts this responsibility. When Bismarck finishes reading, Grand Duke Frederick of Baden, Wilhelm's son-in-law, raises his voice in a cheer. His Majesty Kaiser Wilhelm. The assembly takes up the cry, cheering 3 times. Outside, the troops erupt in celebration, the sound of their voices carrying through the palace, out into the gardens, across the French countryside that has witnessed this transformation of European power. The ceremony is brief, almost austere compared to the elaborate rituals of earlier imperial coronations. There is no crown placed on Wilhelm's head, no anointment with holy oil, none of the medieval pageantry that might have been expected. This is a modern state being born, a state built on military victory and political calculation rather than divine right or ancient tradition. Yet the symbolism resonates across Europe. Germany, which did not exist as a nation a decade ago, is now the dominant power in continental Europe. The balance of power that has governed European affairs since the Congress of Vienna has been shattered and must be rebuilt around this new reality. For Bismarck, standing in the Hall of Mirrors as the cheers echo around him, this moment represents the culmination of nearly a decade of careful planning and ruthless execution. He has fought 3 wars in 7 years, each designed to achieve a specific objective, each concluded at precisely the right moment to avoid overextension. The Danish War secured the duchies and proved Prussian military competence. The Austrian War expelled Austria from German affairs and established Prussian dominance in northern Germany. The French War overcame southern German resistance and provided the emotional crucible in which German nationalism could be forged into political reality. Each war was limited in its objectives. Each was terminated before it could expand into a general European conflict. Each left Prussia stronger and its potential enemies weaker or neutralized. This is realpolitik in its purest form, politics based on practical considerations rather than ideology or morality. Bismarck has no love for democracy or liberalism, but he works with liberal nationalists when their goals align with Prussia's interests. He has no particular affection for the Catholic Church, but he will not let religious considerations interfere with political calculations. He understands power, how it accumulates, and how it is used. He understands that in European diplomacy, there are no permanent friends or permanent enemies, only permanent interests. He has isolated his opponents one by one, ensuring that each war was fought with maximum advantage and minimum risk. He has combined military force with diplomatic manipulation, by knowing when to fight and when to negotiate, when to demand everything and when to settle for enough. The German Empire that emerges from Versailles is a strange hybrid, federal in structure but dominated by Prussia, constitutional in form but authoritarian in practice. The empire has a parliament, the Reichstag, elected by universal male suffrage, but real power rests with the emperor and his chancellor. The individual states retain their own governments, their own laws, their own identities, but they have surrendered control over foreign policy and military affairs to the imperial government in Berlin. Prussia is by far the largest state, containing 2/3 of the empire's population and 3/4 of its territory. The Prussian king is automatically the German emperor. The Prussian prime minister is automatically the German chancellor. The empire is Germany, but Germany is really Greater Prussia, and everyone knows it. This structure creates inherent tensions that will never be fully resolved. The southern states resent Prussian dominance but lack the power to challenge it effectively. Catholics, particularly numerous in Bavaria and the Rhineland, fear Protestant Prussian control over religious affairs. Liberals celebrate national unification but worry about the authoritarian character of the regime. Social Democrats, representing the growing industrial working class, see the empire as an alliance of aristocrats and capitalists against workers' interests. Bismarck will spend the next 2 decades trying to manage these tensions, using a combination of concession and coercion to hold the empire together. But on this January day in 1871, such concerns lie in the future. For now, there is only the reality of accomplished fact. Germany exists. 78 years after the French Revolution proclaimed the nation as the organizing principle of political life, 78 years after the Revolutionary Wars demonstrated that nations could mobilize populations and resources on a scale that traditional states could not match, Germany has finally achieved the national unity that eluded it through the liberal revolutions of 1848. But it has achieved this unity not through popular revolution but through dynastic wars, not through democratic choice but through Prussian force, not from below but from above. This is what historians will call revolution from above, the transformation of society and politics through state action rather than popular uprising. The consequences of German unification ripple outward through Europe like shockwaves from an earthquake. The balance of power, that delicate equilibrium that has prevented any single state from dominating the continent since Napoleon's defeat, has been fundamentally altered. Germany, with its 70 million people, its rapidly industrializing economy, its powerful army, sits in the heart of Europe as a new colossus. France, defeated and humiliated, burns with desire for revenge and will seek allies who share its fear of German power. Austria-Hungary, excluded from German affairs, turns its attention southward toward the Balkans, where it will collide with Russian interests and South Slav nationalism. Russia, which maintained friendly relations with Prussia, watches uneasily as its western neighbor transforms into an industrial and military giant. Britain, secure in its island fastness and global empire, gradually realizes that the European balance it relies on for security has been destroyed and must be rebuilt. The unification of Germany also transforms the nature of European power politics. The wars of German unification demonstrate that modern industrial states can mobilize and deploy armies of unprecedented size with unprecedented speed. Railways move troops in days rather than weeks. Telegraphs coordinate operations across hundreds of miles in real time. Breech-loading rifles and rifled artillery increase the lethality of combat exponentially. The old aristocratic armies, small, professional, expensive to maintain, give way to conscript armies that can field hundreds of thousands of men. War becomes total, involving entire populations, entire economies. The brief, limited conflicts of the 1860s proved to be not a model for future warfare, but a last glimpse of war before it becomes mechanized slaughter on an industrial scale. Bismarck himself understands this, though perhaps not as clearly as later observers will. He has achieved his goals through war, but he has no desire to fight more wars. Germany is strong enough, he believes. Further expansion would only create more enemies, would make Germany's position less secure rather than more. For the next 2 decades, he will construct an elaborate system of alliances designed to isolate France and prevent any coalition of powers from forming against Germany. He will sign a treaty with Austria in 1879, creating the dual alliance that binds the two former enemies together. He will bring Italy into this alliance in 1882, forming the Triple Alliance. He will maintain a secret reinsurance treaty with Russia, even though Russia and Austria are rivals in the Balkans, juggling these contradictory commitments through sheer diplomatic skill. He will even, reluctantly, acquire colonies in Africa and the Pacific when domestic political pressure forces him to do so, though he has no real enthusiasm for overseas empire. But the system he creates is too dependent on his personal skill to survive his departure. When the young Emperor Wilhelm II dismisses him in 1890, demanding to be his own chancellor, the careful balance Bismarck maintained begins to collapse. The reinsurance treaty with Russia is not renewed. Russia, feeling isolated, allies with France. Germany, feeling encircled, relies increasingly on its military strength and its alliance with Austria-Hungary. The arms race accelerates. International crises multiply. The great powers divide into 2 armed camps, Triple Alliance against Triple Entente, waiting for the spark that will ignite the powder magazine. That spark will come in Sarajevo in 1914, and the resulting conflagration will consume the world Bismarck built, will destroy the German empire he created, will kill millions in trenches and on battlefields that make the wars of 1864, 1866, and 1870 look like skirmishes. Yet in January 1871, None of this is foreseeable. On this cold winter day in Versailles, with French guns silent around Paris and German troops celebrating in the gardens of the Sun King's palace, the future appears to belong to Germany. Bismarck has accomplished what seemed impossible, has unified dozens of quarreling states into a single powerful nation through a combination of diplomatic genius and military force that will be studied and admired and feared for generations. He has changed the map of Europe, shifted the balance of power, demonstrated that determined leadership and calculated ruthlessness can reshape political reality. The German Empire, proclaimed in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, will last only 47 years before collapsing in defeat and revolution in 1918. But the German nation that Bismarck created will endure. Through defeat and division and reunification, a permanent alteration of European geography and politics. Standing in that glittering hall surrounded by princes and generals, listening to the cheers that mark the birth of his creation, Bismarck has every reason for satisfaction. He has gambled repeatedly and won every time. He has manipulated events with a surgeon's precision, knowing exactly how much force to apply, when to press forward and when to consolidate. He has understood his opponents better than they understood themselves, anticipating their reactions, turning their strengths into weaknesses. He has been called the Iron Chancellor, a nickname he will wear with pride, but iron is crude and simple. What Bismarck possesses is something more subtle and more dangerous: the ability to see power relationships clearly, stripped of sentiment and ideology, to calculate probabilities with cold accuracy, to use any tool that serves his purposes without being limited by conventional morality or traditional restraints. The cost of this achievement, though rarely counted on this triumphant day, is considerable. 3 wars have killed tens of thousands of soldiers, devastated regions of Denmark, Bohemia, and France, displaced populations, destroyed wealth. The annexation of Alsace-Lorraine has created a wound in Franco-German relations that will fester for 75 years. The militarization of German society, the elevation of the army to a position of unquestioned prestige, will have consequences that extend far beyond the empire's borders. The authoritarian character of the new state, its resistance to democratic reform, its suspicion of political parties and popular movements, will create social tensions that weaken Germany from within, even as it grows stronger in external power. And the very success of Bismarck's methods will encourage imitators, will suggest that power politics and military force can solve any problem, will help create a climate in which war becomes thinkable, even desirable, as a tool of policy. But these are concerns for historians and moralists. The German princes gathering in Versailles are not thinking about long-term consequences. They are thinking about victory, about national greatness, about their place in a historic moment. The officers standing in the Hall of Mirrors are thinking about the battles they have won, the enemies they have defeated, the empire they have built with their blood and courage. The soldiers standing in formation outside are thinking about home, about peace, about the satisfaction of completed duty, and Bismarck, descending from the platform as the ceremony concludes, is thinking about the next problem, the next crisis, the next challenge to be met with the same calculating ruthlessness that has brought him to this moment. The Hall of Mirrors empties slowly, the participants reluctant to leave, knowing they have witnessed something that will echo through history. Outside, in the frozen gardens of Versailles, German troops begin their march back to their encampments, singing victory songs that carry across the silent French landscape. In Paris, the news of the imperial proclamation is received with bitter resignation. One more humiliation added to the catalogue of French suffering. Across Europe, in foreign ministries and royal palaces, Diplomats and ministers begin the work of adjusting to this new reality, calculating how German power will affect their own nation's interests, forming the alliances and enmities that will shape European politics for the next half-century. And in Berlin, already designated as the capital of the new empire, though Wilhelm has not yet returned from France, preparations begin for the consolidation of power. The North German constitution will be extended to the south, creating a single legal framework for the entire nation. The imperial government will take control of railways, postal systems, and other infrastructure, knitting the country together physically as well as politically. The army will be reorganized on a national basis, though each state will retain its own military traditions and units. The economy, already strong, will accelerate its growth as German industry takes advantage of the unified national market and the removal of internal trade barriers. Germany will become an economic powerhouse, rivaling and eventually surpassing Britain and France in industrial production, in scientific innovation, in technological advancement. This is the Germany that Bismarck has made, a nation called into existence, not by poets and philosophers dreaming of cultural unity, not by revolutionaries storming barricades in the name of popular sovereignty, but by a hard-eyed aristocrat who understood that the great questions of the day would not be decided by speeches and majority decisions, but by iron and blood. He has been proven right, and Europe will live with the consequences of his success for generations. The map has been redrawn. The balance of power has shifted. The age of small-scale professional warfare has given way to the age of mass armies and industrial slaughter. And standing at the center of this transformation, the architect of German unity, the man who changed Europe forever, Otto von Bismarck, can look at what he has built with satisfaction and pride and, perhaps, if he is honest with himself, a flicker of uncertainty about what he has unleashed upon the world.